Montana Territory, 1870. The pickaxe bit into frozen earth with a sound like breaking bone. Caleb Ashford was 19 years old, 5 years out of a war that had taken his childhood and given him nothing in return but scars and the ability to sleep through artillery fire. The Colorado silver rush had peaked and crashed. The smart money had moved on. But Caleb wasn't smart money. He was a discharged cavalry soldier with $2 in his pocket in a geological survey map he had stolen from a dead Confederate officer at Petersburg. The rock face glittered in the autumn light. Most men would have missed it. The color was wrong, too dark, almost black where silver should shine white. But Caleb had spent 3 months in a Union Field hospital next to a mining engineer from Nevada who talked about argentite ore until the morphine finally took him. Dark silver sulfide, richer than the white stuff, hidden where fools wouldn't look. Caleb's pickaxe struck again. The stone split. And there, running through the heart of the rock like a vein of frozen lightning, was a seam of argentite 2 inches thick. He didn't shout, didn't celebrate. He'd learned in the war that the universe punished joy. Instead, he marked the spot with a cairn of 3 stones, rode his horse back to the land office in Helena, and registered the claim under a name that meant nothing to anyone. No partners, no investors, no one to betray him when the money started flowing. It took him 2 years to extract $50,000 worth of silver, working alone through winters that would have killed softer men. In 1873, he sold the mine to an Eastern syndicate for $200,000, 3 months before the market crashed, and took half the buyers with it. Some called it luck. Caleb called it getting out before the artillery started. He bought timber rights across 6,000 acres of Montana pine. When the railroad pushed west, Caleb sold them the wood to build their bridges at triple the market rate. By 1870, he had $850,000 in a bank vault in San Francisco, and enough wisdom to know that money without land was just paper. Silver Ridge Ranch, 600 acres of the best grazing land in Montana Territory, with water rights that would matter more than gold once the railroad brought civilization and all its thirsty demands. The house took him a year to build, working mostly alone except for a carpenter from Denver who asked too many questions and left after 2 months. 3 bedrooms, stone fireplace, iron stove, everything a family would need. But Caleb Ashford had no family. He'd built the house for a woman named Margaret Sinclair, a banker's daughter from San Francisco who'd promised to marry him once he'd proven himself worthy. He'd proven himself with $850,000 and a ranch that would be worth millions when the railroad came. Margaret had taken one look at the Montana wilderness, at the man who smelled like pine sap and horse sweat, and she'd chosen a different future. She married James Blackwood's younger brother, a man who'd inherited oil wells in Texas and wore suits that cost more than most men earned in a year. Caleb had stopped building the day he got her letter. The house had 3 bedrooms, but no curtains, no rugs, no pictures on the walls, just empty rooms waiting for people who would never come. That was 11 years ago. Now it was October 1888, and Caleb Ashford was 35 years old, alone by choice and necessity, a man who'd built an empire with his own hands and found that empires were cold comfort when you ate dinner in silence every night. The fence line ran for 7 miles around the northern boundary of Silver Ridge Ranch. Caleb rode it every 3rd day, checking for breaks, for cattle that had wandered through gaps, for signs that winter was coming early. The bay mare beneath him was 8 years old, a Morgan thoroughbred cross he'd bred himself, and she knew the route well enough that Caleb barely had to guide her. His left hand ached. It always did when the temperature dropped below freezing. The mini-A ball had gone clean through at Antietam, taking bone fragments and nerve endings with it. The army surgeon had wanted to amputate. Caleb had put his colt against the man's head and suggested alternatives. 26 years later, he still had the hand. It still ached. Some prices you paid in installments. The sun was setting, turning the Montana sky the color of a healing bruise. 6 o'clock, maybe 6:15. Temperature dropping fast, the kind of cold that had teeth. Caleb had learned to read weather the way some men read books. Storm coming, probably by midnight. Heavy snow. 3 days of it, if the clouds were telling the truth. That's when he saw the smoke, just a wisp, thin and gray, rising from the direction of the old Jameson claim. Nobody had lived there since Dutch Jameson went bust in '80, lost everything to a bad poker hand and a worse understanding of mining law. The claim sat abandoned, A half-collapsed shack and a played-out mine shaft that occasionally killed curious children who didn't listen to their mothers. Smoke meant people. People meant trouble. Caleb's hand moved to the Winchester rifle in his saddle scabbard, checking the action by habit. 15 rounds of 44-40 ammunition, enough to solve most problems that came up in Montana territory. He rode toward the smoke. The fire was nearly dead, just embers and ash in a poorly constructed ring of stones. A woman lay beside it, motionless, her face the color of old snow. Two children huddled against her, a boy of maybe 11 and a girl half that age. The boy was trying to start the fire again, working with hands that shook so badly he could barely hold the matches. The girl wasn't moving at all. Caleb's horse stopped 20 feet away. The boy's head snapped up. He had dark hair and darker eyes and the kind of careful stillness that meant he'd learned young that sudden movements could get you killed. "Get away from us," the boy said. His voice was steady, but there was fear underneath it, the kind that made boys do stupid things. Caleb dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible. "Storm's coming. You'll be dead in 3 hours if you stay out here." "We don't need help." "Son, your mother's dying. You're trying to start a fire with wet wood. That little girl hasn't moved since I rode up." "Yes, you need help." The boy shifted position, putting himself between Caleb and the collapsed woman. "Protective, futile, brave. We'll manage." "No, you won't." Caleb moved closer. The boy tensed, but didn't run. Up close, Caleb could see the details that painted the whole picture. The woman's dress had been expensive once, maybe 2 years ago. Now it was patches over patches, threadbare at the elbows. The children's faces were hollow, the kind of hungry that took weeks to achieve. The boy's shoes had holes in both soles. The girl's coat was too thin for October, let alone for Montana. "What happened?" Caleb asked. "None of your business." "Fair enough." Caleb knelt beside the woman, pressing 2 fingers against her neck. Pulse fast and thready, fever heat radiating through her skin, breathing shallow. Pneumonia, probably. Couple days into it, maybe 3. The children looked like they'd been hungry for a month. "What's your name, son?" The boy hesitated. "Thomas." "Thomas what?" "Thomas Hayes. I'm Caleb Ashford. I own Silver Ridge Ranch, about 7 miles north. Your mother needs a doctor, and you need food, and there's a blizzard coming that'll kill all 3 of you if you're still out here when it hits. We tried the boarding house in town. We don't have enough money." "How much do you have?" Thomas opened his palm. 2 dimes and 3 pennies, 23 cents. Enough to buy a loaf of bread and half a pound of coffee. Not enough to keep 3 people alive through a Montana winter. "Where's your father?" "Dead, 2 years ago." "And you've been traveling since?" Thomas nodded. The girl stirred slightly, making a small sound like a wounded animal. Thomas reached down, touching her shoulder. "It's okay, Gracie. Mama's just resting." But Mama wasn't resting. Mama was dying. Caleb had seen enough dying in the war to recognize the look. Another 6 hours, maybe 12 if she was strong, the children would wake up tomorrow with a corpse. "Here's what's going to happen," Caleb said. "I'm going to take you to my ranch. Your mother needs medicine and warmth. You 2 need food. After she's better, we'll talk about what comes next. We're not charity cases." The words came out hard, proud, desperate. Caleb recognized the tone. He'd used it himself once, after the war, when he had nothing but his name and his refusal to accept handouts. "You're right," Caleb said. "You're not charity. But your mother's dying and your sister's got maybe 3 hours before hypothermia takes her. You can have pride or you can have family. Choose." Thomas looked at his mother, at his sister, at the 23 cents in his hand, at the soirée, which was darkening with the promise of snow. A boy making a man's decision with no good options. "If you hurt us," Thomas said quietly, "I'll kill you." "Fair enough." Caleb stood. "Help me get your mother on the horse." Elena Hayes weighed less than 100 pounds. Caleb could feel every bone in her back as he lifted her into the saddle. She didn't wake, which was probably a mercy. Thomas climbed up behind her, holding her steady. Caleb lifted the little girl. Grace. She opened her eyes once, looked at him with the kind of empty gaze that children got when they'd stopped expecting rescue, and then closed them again. The ride back took 40 minutes. The snow started 15 minutes in, light at first, then heavy, the kind of snowfall that erased horizons and turned the world into white static. Caleb navigated by memory and by the mare's instinct. The children didn't speak. The woman didn't move. By the time they reached Silver Ridge Ranch, the temperature had dropped to 10 degrees and the wind was singing murder songs through the pine trees. The house was dark and cold. Caleb kicked the door open, carried Elena Hayes inside, laid her on his own bed. Thomas followed, still holding Grace. The boy's face was set in a stone, refusing to show fear or weakness, or any of the things that children felt when their mothers were dying. "Stoke the fire," Caleb said. "Big logs. We need heat fast." Thomas moved. Good. The boy could follow orders, could function in crisis. That would matter if his mother didn't make it. Caleb worked by instinct and by memory. Field medicine. The kind you learned in the war when surgeons were dead and supplies were gone and men died because nobody knew what to do. Strip the wet clothes, wrap in blankets, hot stones from the fireplace, wrapped in cloth, placed along the body to fight hypothermia, willow bark tea for fever, beef broth for dehydration and nutrition. Elena Hayes's fever was 104 degrees. Her breathing rattled. Her pulse jumped and skipped like a panicked animal. Pneumonia advanced. In a field hospital, she'd be marked for the death tent. But this wasn't a field hospital, and Caleb Ashford had spent 23 years learning that determined people could survive things that should kill them. He made Thomas help, showed him how to check pulse, how to count breaths, how to recognize the signs of crisis. The boy learned fast, asked good questions, didn't flinch when his mother's breathing stopped for 3 seconds before starting again. Grace slept through it all, wrapped in blankets by the fire, her small chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. Midnight came. The storm hit in full force, winds screaming around the house like a living thing. Elena Hayes's fever broke at 1 in the morning, sweat soaking through the blankets. Caleb changed them, brought fresh ones. Thomas sat in a chair beside the bed, watching his mother breathe, his face gray with exhaustion and fear. "Sleep," Caleb said. "I'll watch her." "No, easy. Son, you're no good to her if you collapse." "I said no." Caleb understood. He'd sat vigil over dying men in the war, refusing to leave even when officers ordered it. You didn't abandon people, not when they might wake up alone, not when they might die while you were sleeping. "Then I'll make coffee," Caleb said. Dawn came gray and cold. The storm was still raging, but Elena Hayes was breathing easier, her fever down to 101. Still dangerous, but no longer immediately lethal. Thomas had fallen asleep in the chair, his head tilted at an angle that would leave his neck screaming when he woke. Grace was awake, sitting by the fire, staring at nothing. Caleb made breakfast, eggs from his chickens, bacon from his smokehouse, biscuits from scratch. Simple food, but there was plenty of it. When Grace smelled the cooking, something changed in her face. Hope, maybe, or just hunger. "Come eat," Caleb said. She didn't move. He brought the plate to her, set it on the floor beside her. She looked at it, at him, at the food. "It's not poison," Caleb said. "Just breakfast." She ate like someone who'd forgotten what food tasted like, shoving biscuit into her mouth with both hands, swallowing without chewing. Caleb let her. Starvation had its own rhythm. You couldn't rush recovery. Thomas woke up 20 minutes later, jerking upright in the chair, immediately checking his mother. Still breathing, still alive. He saw Grace eating, saw the plate of food Caleb had left for him on the table. "Your mother's stable," Caleb said. "Fever's down, breathing's better. She'll probably wake up this afternoon." "And then what?" "And then we talk." Thomas ate, slower than his sister, but still fast, still hungry. The boy had probably been giving most of his food to the women for weeks. That's what men did. What boys who were learning to be men did. Elena Hayes woke at 3 in the afternoon. Confused at first, disoriented, reaching for children who weren't there. Caleb brought Thomas and Grace to her bedside. She cried when she saw them. Not loud, just quiet tears running down hollowed cheeks. "Where are we?" Her voice was rough, damaged by fever. "Silver Ridge Ranch," Caleb said. "My name's Caleb Ashford. You were dying out by the Jameson claim. I brought you here." "I can't pay you, Yeshinimam." "I know." Then why? Good question. Caleb had spent 11 years avoiding exactly this situation. No complications, no responsibilities, no people who needed things from him. But here he was with a dying woman and two starving children in his house, in a storm that might last 3 days. Because I've seen enough people die, Caleb said. I'm tired of it. Elena tried to sit up, failed. The fever had taken everything. She looked at her children, at Thomas's hollow face, at Grace's too thin arms. She looked at the 23 cents on the bedside table. I have nothing to offer you, she said. No money, no family, just two children and a body that's failing. Then we'll work something out after you're not dying anymore. I don't understand. You will. Rest first. The second day was quieter. The storm raged, but the house was warm, the fire constant, food available. Elena slept most of the time, her body doing the hard work of healing. Thomas explored the ranch buildings, moving through snow that was hip-deep in places. Grace discovered the chickens in their heated coop and spent an hour watching them, naming them in a whisper. Henrietta, Beatrice, Martha, Adelaide, Constance, and the mean white one who she decided was Empress Victoria. Caleb watched them adapt, watched Thomas test boundaries, checking doors, looking for exits, making sure they could run if they needed to. Watched Grace slowly uncurl from her protective crouch, starting to believe that maybe food would keep coming, maybe warmth would last. Watched Elena sleep and wake and sleep again, her body fighting a war that modern medicine barely understood and frontier medicine handled with willow bark and prayer. On the third day, the storm broke. The world outside was white and alien. Snow drifted against the barn up to the roofline. Caleb and Thomas spent the morning digging paths, clearing the barn doors, checking on cattle that had huddled together for warmth. The boy worked without complaint, following instructions, learning to read snow depth and wind patterns. You've done ranch work before? Caleb asked. No, sir. Papa was a bank clerk in Boston. We lived in the city. Then how do you know how to work? Mama taught me. She said idleness is how boys become useless men. Smart woman. Don't call me sir. I work for a living. Caleb's fine. That afternoon, Elena was strong enough to sit up, strong enough to eat solid food, strong enough to have the conversation that had been waiting since the moment Caleb carried her through his door. I need to know what you want from us, she said. Direct, no pretense. Caleb respected that. I don't want anything, but you need something, so we'll make a deal. What kind of deal? I have a house that's too big for one man. You have skills I need. Cooking, cleaning, managing a household. This is business. Elena looked around the room, saw the dust, the unmended clothes, the bare walls. How long have you lived alone? 11 years. Why? Because people leave, or they die, and I got tired of it. She understood. He could see it in her eyes. This was a woman who'd buried a husband, lost a home, crossed 1,000 miles with nothing but 23 cents and the will to keep her children breathing. What are your terms? She asked. 1-month trial. You work. Cook 3 meals a day, keep the house clean, mend what needs mending. I provide room and board for all 3 of you. Your children help where they can. The boy with livestock, the girl with whatever's age appropriate. At the end of the month, we both decide if it works. If it does, we continue through winter. If it doesn't, I pay your stage fare to wherever you want to go. That's very generous. It's practical. I need help. You need shelter. This isn't charity. No, Elena said slowly. It's survival. That's all any of us are doing, surviving. She held out her hand, calloused palm, rough fingers, the hands of someone who'd done hard labor. Caleb shook it. The deal was made. Thomas appeared in the doorway. He'd been listening. Why are you doing this? He asked. Really? Caleb looked at the boy, saw himself at 11, saw the hunger for a reason, for something that made sense in a world that had stopped making sense. I had a friend once, Caleb said. Name was James Corrigan. We fought together in the war. At Chancellorsville, there was an artillery barrage. Shell landed right next to me. James threw himself on it, took the blast, saved my life and 2 others. He died? In my arms. Last thing he said was, make it worth something. I've spent 23 years trying to figure out what that means. And you think this is what it means? Helping us? I don't know, but maybe it's a start. Thomas nodded, didn't smile, but something changed in his stance. Less defensive. Say, still wary, but no longer expecting betrayal at any moment. That evening, Elena made dinner. The first real dinner Caleb had eaten in 11 years that he hadn't cooked himself. Stew from the beef in his smokehouse. Bread from scratch. Coffee strong enough to resurrect the dead. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't complicated. But when Caleb sat down at a table with other people, with voices and conversation and the small domestic sounds of a family existing together, something in his chest cracked. He'd forgotten this. Forgotten what it meant to share space with people who weren't there to take something from you. Forgotten the sound of a child asking questions. Forgotten the way a woman's presence changed a room, made it warmer somehow. After dinner, Grace brought him a drawing. Chickens, 6 of them rendered in charcoal on paper she'd found somewhere. They looked more like angry clouds than birds, but the intent was clear. These are your chickens, she said solemnly. Except Empress Victoria. She's mine now. Is that so? Yes, she told me. The chicken told you? She has opinions, strong ones. Caleb looked at Elena, who was trying not to smile. Thomas was openly grinning, and this 6-year-old girl had just claimed ownership of his chickens through sheer force of will. Well, Caleb said, I suppose if Empress Victoria has strong opinions, we should respect them. Grace nodded, satisfied. She took the drawing and pinned it to the wall beside the fireplace. The first decoration Silver Ridge Ranch had seen in 11 years. That night, lying in the spare bedroom because Elena had his bed and he'd given Thomas the other spare room, Caleb stared at the ceiling and tried to remember the last time he'd felt something other than empty. The last time he'd looked forward to tomorrow instead of just enduring it. He thought about James Corrigan, dead 23 years, but somehow still present. Thought about Margaret Sinclair, who'd wanted a different kind of man and had left him to become one alone. Thought about the house he'd built for a family that never came, and the way Grace's drawing looked on his wall, and the sound of Thomas's questions at dinner, and Elena's careful competence in his kitchen. Make it worth something, James had said. Maybe this was how you did it, not with grand gestures or heroic sacrifice, just with the quiet choice to let people in when every instinct screamed to keep the walls up. Maybe. The first week established patterns. Caleb and Thomas worked together in the mornings, checking cattle, mending fences, breaking ice on water troughs. The boy learned fast, asked good questions, didn't complain when the work was hard. Elena restored order to a house that had known only functional survival. Suddenly, there were curtains, pulled from a trunk in storage where Caleb had buried them 11 years ago. Curtains Margaret had chosen and he'd been too hurt to hang. Elena hung them without asking permission. And when Caleb saw them framing the kitchen window, catching afternoon light, he didn't tell her to take them down. Grace managed the chickens with the seriousness of a general commanding troops. She collected eggs, distributed feed, and maintained detailed reports on each hen's production that she delivered to Caleb every evening. Henrietta was reliable. Beatrice was lazy. Empress Victoria laid the best eggs but had, according to Grace, an attitude problem. On the 8th day, they went to town. Supplies. Salt, flour, coffee, things the ranch needed and Caleb usually bought alone. This time he brought the whole family in his wagon. That's what they looked like. A family. He could see it in the way people watched them arrive. Martha Thornton, who ran the general store with her husband, nearly dropped the bolt of cloth she was holding. Caleb Ashford, when she said, with a family, never thought I'd see the day. It's a business arrangement, Martha. Of course it is. Martha's smile said she didn't believe in him for a second. Mrs. Hayes, is it? I'm Martha Thornton. Welcome to Silver Creek. Elena shook her hand. Caleb noticed she didn't correct the implied assumption that she was married to him. Easier to let people think what they wanted than explain complicated truths. They bought supplies. Caleb paid cash. 6 months' worth of staples, enough to see them through a hard winter. $140, more than most families spent in a year. Martha watched the money stack up, watched the way Thomas helped load the wagon, watched Grace explain to anyone who'd listen about Empress Victoria's attitude problem. You know, Martha said to Caleb as he was leaving, the whole town's going to talk. Let them. I stopped caring what people think at Gettysburg. That's not what I mean. I mean people are going to assume things. About you and Mrs. Hayes. About whether this is proper. Martha, I'm 35 years old. I own 600 acres and enough money to buy Silver Creek twice over. I don't care what people assume. But she might. Caleb looked at Elena, who was helping Grace into the wagon. Then she can tell me herself. On the ride home, Elena did exactly that. We need to talk about appearances. What about them? You heard Martha, the town's going to gossip. They're going to assume we're involved. Does that bother you? It bothers me that my children might hear things. That Thomas might have to fight boys who say crude things about his mother. Then we'll deal with that if it happens. Just like that? Yes, just like that. Elena was quiet for a long moment. You are not what I expected. What did you expect? A man who wanted something. Payment, services, the usual things desperate women provide when they have nothing else to trade. I've got money. If I wanted those things, I could buy them in any town between here and San Francisco. What I can't buy is... Caleb stopped. He'd been about to say what I lost. About to admit to money. Is what? Time, I've gone. I can't buy back the 11 years I spent alone because I was too angry to let anyone close. And now? Now I'm too tired to stay angry. They rode in silence after that, but it was a different kind of silence, not uncomfortable. Just two people who understood what it meant to lose everything and keep walking anyway. That night, Thomas found the cavalry saber. It hung above the fireplace, a Model 1860 light cavalry saber, with the U.S. marking still visible on the blade, despite decades of careful maintenance. Thomas stared at it with the fascination of a boy who'd never seen war, but understood its mythology. Can I hold it? He asked. Do you know how? No, sir, Caleb. Caleb took the saber down, showed Thomas the proper grip, the balance point, the way cavalry soldiers learn to extend and withdraw without overextending. The boy was clumsy at first, but determined. He listened. He practiced. He didn't give up. This was your friend's? Thomas asked. James? It was. He carried it at Chancellorsville. After he died, I kept it. Seemed wrong to let it rust or be sold for scrap. Did you use it? In battle? Twice, Spotsylvania and Petersburg. Did it save you? No, James saved me. The saber just stayed with me after he couldn't. Thomas was quiet, running his hand along the blade's flat. My papa didn't have anything like this. He worked in a bank, wore a suit, counted other people's money. That's honest work. But it didn't save him. The consumption took him anyway, and all his numbers didn't matter when the creditors came. Your papa sounds like a good man who had bad luck. He was. I miss him. I know. Do you think he'd be proud of me? Learning this? Learning to work a ranch? Caleb looked at the boy, 11 years old and already carrying the weight of being the man of the family. Already learning that life didn't care about fair or unfair, just about survival. I think, Caleb said carefully, that any father would be proud to have a son like you. Thomas's eyes watered. He didn't cry, but something in him relaxed just a little. A burden shared, even if not lifted. The second week brought the hard work, teaching Thomas to ride properly, not just sit on a horse, but control it, guide it, make it an extension of will. Elena reorganized the kitchen, the pantry, the entire household system that Caleb had maintained through sheer bloody-minded repetition. Grace expanded her chicken empire, discovering that one of the hens was brooding and needed to be separated. Adelaide's going to have babies, Grace announced at dinner. If the eggs are fertile, Caleb said, no guarantees. They're fertile. Adelaide told me. The chicken told you. She has opinions about reproduction. Caleb looked at Elena, who was trying desperately not to laugh, looked at Thomas, who'd given up and was grinning openly, looked at this 6-year-old girl who had apparently established telepathic communication with his chickens. Well, Caleb said, I suppose we should trust Adelaide's judgment on the matter. That night, he woke at 2 a.m. to the sound of screaming. His screaming. The nightmare had him again. Chancellorsville, the artillery barrage, James throwing himself on the shell. The explosion that turned the world red and took away the only friend Caleb had ever trusted. He sat up in bed, shaking, sweat-soaked. The door opened. Elena stood there in her nightgown, a candle in her hand. "You're not the only one who has nightmares," she said quietly. "I'm sorry, did I wake you?" "You've woken me every night since we got here. I just didn't say anything." She sat in the chair beside his bed, not touching, just present. "Do you want to talk about it?" "No." "Fair enough, but you're not alone with them anymore. That's something in. Is it?" "I think so. When William was dying, I used to wake up screaming. Thomas would hear. He was 9, too young to understand, but old enough to be scared. After William died, I stopped screaming. Not because the nightmares went away, because I was the only adult left, and adults don't get to break." "That's not fair." "No, it's survival. But now there's someone else, so maybe we can both afford to break a little." She left, closed the door. Caleb sat in the dark and thought about what she'd said. About breaking, about survival, about the difference between being alone and being with people who understood that sometimes the war didn't end when the shooting stopped. The third week was when everything changed. The month was almost over. They'd stopped mentioning it, stopped talking about the trial period or what came next. They'd just fallen into patterns that felt less like temporary arrangements and more like life. Then the letter came, delivered by a writer from town. Expensive paper, expensive ink, expensive everything. The seal was unfamiliar, but the name at the bottom made Caleb's jaw clench. Vincent Blackwood. Request the honor of meeting to discuss land matters of mutual interest. Confident we can reach arrangement beneficial to both parties. Failure to respond will be considered hostile intent. Hostile intent. Mahan. That was lawyer talk. That was threat wrapped in courtesy. "Who's Vincent Blackwood?" Elena asked. She'd been reading over his shoulder. "A man who thinks money solves everything." "And does it?" "It solves most things, not all." That evening, after the children were in bed, Caleb told Elena the full story. Vincent Blackwood, Confederate veteran, turned land baron, 56 years old and rich enough to buy Montana territory twice over. He'd been buying up ranches all year, consolidating holdings, preparing for the railroad that would make water rights more valuable than gold. "He wants Silver Ridge?" Elena asked. "He wants the water rights. The creek that runs through my property feeds everything downstream. Control that, and you control the valley." "What will you do?" "Tell him no. And if he doesn't accept no, then we'll deal with what comes." Elena was quiet. Then she said, "We?" Caleb looked at her, at this woman who'd come to his ranch with 23 cents and 2 starving children, who'd somehow transformed his house from a monument to isolation into something that felt dangerously close to home. "Yes," he said, "we." The month ended on November 30th. No one mentioned it. They ate dinner. Grace reported on Empress Victoria's continuing attitude problem. Thomas asked about rifle maintenance. Elena mentioned that the pantry needed reorganizing. Normal things, daily things, the kind of things that families discussed without thinking about whether they were a family at all. Later, Elena found Caleb on the porch. He was cleaning the cavalry saber, the ritual he performed every week. She sat beside him, not speaking, just present in the way she'd learned he preferred. Words were sometimes too heavy. "The month's over," she finally said. "I know. We haven't talked about what comes next." "No." "Why not?" Caleb kept polishing the saber, steady strokes, muscle memory from 23 years of maintenance. "Because I don't want you to leave." "We don't want to leave either." "Then stay." "For how long?" "As long as it works. Through winter at least. Maybe longer. Maybe indefinitely." Elena touched his hand, made him stop polishing and look at her. "What are we doing, Caleb?" "Really?" "I don't know. I thought this was business. Practical arrangement. But it stopped being that about 2 weeks ago." "When did it stop?" "When I realized I was looking forward to dinner. When I started thinking about what Thomas needed to learn next. When I caught myself smiling at Grace's chicken reports. When I stopped sleeping through my nightmares because I knew you'd hear and I knew that mattered." "I'm scared," Elena said. "Of what?" "Of this. Of letting my children get attached. of getting attached myself, of building something and then losing it. I'm scared too. I've spent 11 years making sure I couldn't lose anything by refusing to have anything worth losing. And now you're here, and your children are here, and I have everything to lose. So what do we do? Caleb looked at her, at this woman who'd faced death and poverty and 1,000 miles of hardship and still found the courage to keep walking. We do what James taught me at Chancellorsville. We do what's right despite being scared. And what's right? This, you staying, your children staying, us figuring out what comes next together instead of alone. Elena smiled. It was the first real smile he'd seen from her. Not polite, not careful, just genuine. All right, we'll stay. Through winter? Through whatever comes. They sat in silence after that. The Montana night was cold and clear, stars scattered across the sky like someone had thrown diamonds. Inside the house, Thomas and Grace were sleeping, safe and warm and fed. Tomorrow would bring work and challenges, and probably Vincent Blackwood with his threats and his money. But tonight, on this porch, Caleb Ashford felt something he hadn't felt in 23 years. Not alone. The next morning brought Vincent Blackwood himself. He arrived at 10 o'clock with 5 men, all armed, all professional, in the way that said they'd been hired for more than ranch work. Caleb stood on his porch, Thomas beside him despite Elena's protests, and watched the richest man in Montana territory dismount from a horse that cost more than most homesteads. Blackwood was 56 but looked older, worn by years of building an empire through force and calculation. Confederate cavalry officer once, land baron now, the kind of man who thought winning was the only thing that mattered and losing wasn't possible. Major Ashford, Blackwood said. His voice was smooth, educated, dangerous. I was never a major, and you're on private property. Of course, forgive the intrusion. I came to make you an offer. I got your letter. Then you know I'm buying land in this valley. Your 600 acres would complete my acquisition. Not for sale, Blackwood smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. I'm prepared to pay $50,000. Cash. Today. 50,000 was generous. Too generous. Market value for 600 acres was maybe $1,800. Blackwood was offering 27 times that. Why so much? Caleb asked. Because I want it. Because I'm prepared to be generous with reasonable men. And unreasonable men? Find that generosity has limits. Thomas shifted beside Caleb. The boy was tense, reading the threat in Blackwood's tone. Reading the armed men, the careful positioning, the whole setup designed to intimidate. My land is worth 200,000, Caleb said. Water rights alone are worth 100. You know it, I know it. 50,000 is insulting. Blackwood's mask cracked. Just for a second. That's an optimistic valuation. Railroads coming. Water rights become critical. You're positioning to control the whole valley. My creek feeds everything downstream. Without it, your empire has a gap. You've been doing homework. I survived the war by understanding terrain and supply lines. Your supply line runs through my property. That makes it valuable. Blackwood looked at Thomas, at Elena, visible through the kitchen window, at Grace, who'd wandered outside to see what the fuss was about. You have dependents now. That changes calculations. A man alone can afford stubbornness. A man with family must think practically. The threat was clear, unsubtle, effective. Caleb felt Thomas tense beside him, felt his own hand drift toward the Colt on his hip. My family is not your concern, Caleb said quietly. On the contrary, everything in this valley concerns me, especially when custody arrangements are ambiguous. That landed like a gut punch. Elena wasn't married to Caleb. Thomas and Grace had no legal protection beyond his goodwill. Blackwood could make trouble with county officials, claim the children were being endangered, involve courts and lawyers and bureaucracy that would cost time and money to fight. This conversation is over, Caleb said. Get off my land. Blackwood tipped his hat. Think carefully, Major. Winter is long. Accidents happen. I'd hate for anything unfortunate to befall anyone under your care. He mounted his horse. His men followed. They rode away slowly, deliberately, making sure Caleb understood this wasn't over. After they left, Elena came outside. She'd heard everything. He threatened us. Yes. What do we do? We prepare. Vincent Blackwood just made the biggest mistake of his life. What mistake? Caleb looked at her, at Thomas, at Grace, who was explaining to Empress Victoria that the bad men were gone now. He assumed I have something to lose. He's right, but he's wrong about what that means. I don't understand. For 11 years, I had nothing worth protecting. No reason to fight, no reason to do anything but survive. Now I have all of you. Now I have everything. And that means Vincent Blackwood just picked a fight with a man who has nothing left to lose and everything to protect. What will you do? Whatever I have to. James Corrigan saved my life so I could do something with it. Maybe this is what. Maybe protecting you, protecting your children, protecting what we're building here. Maybe this is how I honor what James gave me. Not by surviving alone, but by making that survival mean something. Thomas was listening. Are we in danger? Yes. What can I do? Learn, train, be ready. If Blackwood comes for us, we'll need every person in this house to be able to fight. That afternoon, Caleb began teaching Thomas to shoot. Not the careful target practice they'd done before. Combat shooting, quick draw, moving targets. The kind of skills you needed when men with guns came to take what was yours. Elena watched from the porch. Grace watched from the chicken coop. And somewhere in the distance, Vincent Blackwood was planning his next move in a game that only one side knew they were playing. Winter was coming. War was coming. And Caleb Ashford, who'd spent 11 years alone, finally had something worth fighting for. The question was whether he could keep it. December came to Montana territory with teeth. The temperature dropped to 15 below zero and stayed there for a week. Cattle huddled in groups of 30 or 40, sharing warmth, surviving through instinct older than human civilization. Caleb and Thomas rode the fence lines every morning, breaking ice on water troughs, checking for animals caught in drifts, doing the endless work that kept a ranch alive through winter. Thomas had grown since November. Not physically, though Elena's cooking had put some meat on his bones. But something in his bearing had changed. He sat his horse differently now, moved with purpose instead of hesitation. When Caleb showed him how to check a hoof for stones or how to read snow depth by wind patterns, the boy absorbed information like a battlefield commander learning terrain. Why does Blackwood want the land so badly? Thomas asked one morning. They were 7 miles from the house, checking the northern boundary where the creek ran fastest and coldest. Control, Caleb said. The railroad's coming through this valley in 2 years, maybe 3. Water rights will determine who prospers and who dies. My creek feeds 6 downstream properties. Control it and you control them. How much is it really worth? To Blackwood? Everything. His empire has a gap shaped exactly like Silver Ridge Ranch. Without my land, his holdings are vulnerable. Someone else could buy property downstream, cut off his water, destroy 20 years of consolidation. So he'll never stop trying. No, he won't. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Are we going to die?" Caleb looked at the boy, 11 years old and asking the question with the calm practicality of someone who'd already lost everything once and knew it could happen again. Not if I can prevent it. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have. In the war, men asked me the same thing. Will we die today? Will we survive this battle? I never lied to them. I said what I'll say to you now. I'll do everything in my power to keep you alive. But I can't promise we'll all survive what's coming. Papa used to promise things would be fine. He promised right up until he died. Your papa wanted to protect you from fear. I respect that. But I won't lie to you. You're old enough to know the truth and strong enough to handle it. Thomas nodded. Thank you. For what? For treating me like a man. You've earned it. They rode in silence after that. The wind picked up, carrying snow that stung exposed skin like thrown sand. Montana winter didn't care about fairness or justice or who deserved to survive. It just tested everyone and took the ones who failed. Back at the ranch, Elena was teaching Grace mathematics using chicken eggs as counters. If Henrietta lays 3 eggs and Beatrice lays 4, how many total? If Adelaide is brooding at 12 eggs and 3 don't hatch, how many chicks remain? The girl was bright, picking up concepts faster than most children her age. But then, Grace had learned young that counting mattered. Counting money, counting days between meals, counting chances before luck ran out. "Mama," Grace said, looking up from her slate, "is the bad man going to hurt us?" Elena's hand stilled on the bread dough she was kneading. "What makes you think that?" "I heard you and Caleb talking. After the bad man came, you were scared." "I was concerned. That's different from scared." "You sounded the same as when Papa was dying, like you were trying to be brave but weren't sure if brave was enough." Elena sat down beside her daughter, 6 years old and already too wise for childhood. "Mr. Blackwood wants something Caleb won't sell. That makes him dangerous. But Caleb is keeping us safe. What if Caleb can't? Then we'll keep ourselves safe. That's what we've always done, isn't it? Since Papa died, we've survived because we're strong. You and me and Thomas. We're strong enough to survive anything." Grace considered this. "I don't feel strong." "Strength isn't about feeling, it's about continuing when you want to stop. You're one of the strongest people I know." "Stronger than Caleb?" "Different kind of strong. Caleb survived a war. You survived losing everything. Both kinds of strength matter." Grace went back to her mathematics. Elena went back to her bread. But something in the conversation stayed with her. The fear in her daughter's voice. The questions she herself had been avoiding. What if Caleb couldn't protect them? What if Vincent Blackwood proved unstoppable? What then? That afternoon, Pete Lawson arrived. He was 53 years old, missing his left arm from Cold Harbor, running a failing ranch 10 miles south. He dismounted awkwardly, compensating for balance thrown off by missing weight. "Caleb, he said, "we need to talk." They talked in the barn, away from the house, away from children who didn't need to hear every danger. Pete's ranch was going under. $3,000 in debt, no way to pay, bank threatening foreclosure. Blackwood had made an offer. $12,000 for 300 acres. Generous. Too generous. "He's buying everyone out," Pete said. "Henderson sold last month. Wilson sold 2 weeks ago. I'm the last one between his northern holdings and Silver Creek. After me, it's just you." "Don't sell," Caleb said. "I don't have a choice. Bank forecloses in January. At least Blackwood's offer gives me something to restart somewhere else. Selling to him makes him stronger, gives him more leverage against me." "I know, but I've got a wife and 3 children and no arm. I can't fight a war against the richest man in Montana. You can. I can't." Caleb understood. Pete wasn't a coward. He was a realist. Sometimes survival meant retreat. Sometimes the only way to protect your family was to abandon the field. "When do you sign?" Caleb asked. "Next week. I wanted to tell you first. Warn you that you're about to be surrounded." After Pete left, Caleb stood in the barn and did battlefield mathematics. Blackwood owned everything north, south, and east of Silver Ridge Ranch. Only the west was open, leading to mountains too steep for cattle, too remote for value. Strategically, Caleb was about to be encircled, cut off, isolated in a way that would make any resistance costly and probably futile, unless he changed the equation. That night, he gathered Elena and Thomas in the kitchen after Grace was asleep, spread a hand-drawn map on the table showing property lines, water flow, railroad projections. "We're going to be surrounded," he said. "Within 2 weeks, Blackwood will own everything adjacent to this ranch. That gives him options: legal pressure, economic pressure, physical intimidation. We need allies." "What kind of allies?" Elena asked. "The kind with resources and motivation to oppose him. Railroad companies, territorial government, other ranchers who haven't sold yet. We build a coalition large enough that Blackwood can't pick us off individually." "How do we do that?" "We make the fight bigger than just Silver Ridge Ranch. We make it about water rights policy, about monopolistic land consolidation, about whether one man should control an entire valley. We turn this into a political problem that Blackwood can't solve with money." Thomas was studying the map. "The railroad needs water for their engines. If Blackwood controls all the water, he controls railroad costs." "Exactly. So the railroad has a financial incentive to prevent monopoly." "Yes. Then we offer them an alternative: guaranteed water access at fair rates if they support legal protections against consolidation." Caleb looked at the boy. 11 years old and thinking like a cavalry officer, planning campaign logistics. That's exactly right. How did you know that? Papa worked for a bank. He talked about leverage and incentive all the time. He said business was just war with paperwork instead of bullets. Your papa was a smart man. Not smart enough to survive consumption, but maybe smart enough that his son survives Blackwood. The plan was simple in concept, brutally complex in execution. Contact remaining independent ranchers. Build coalition of shared interests. Approach railroad with unified proposal. Force territorial government to address monopoly concerns. Create enough legal and political complications that Blackwood's path of least resistance was negotiation instead of conquest. It required coordination, travel, risk, and time. Always time. They had until February. Blackwood had filed his formal offer on Silver Ridge Ranch. $60,000, final offer, deadline February 1st. Refuse and he'd pursue alternative acquisition strategies. Lawyer talk for war. December 10th, Caleb sent Thomas on his first solo mission. 30 miles to the Wilson Ranch, carrying sealed letters to 3 ranchers Blackwood hadn't bought yet. The boy left at dawn on Shadow, their best horse, carrying Winchester and Colt in the weight of adult responsibility. Elena watched him go with the expression of mothers sending sons to war throughout history. Fear, pride, the terrible knowledge that protection eventually means letting go. He's 11 years old, she said. He's old enough, and we need him to be. That doesn't make this easier. No, it doesn't. Thomas returned at sunset, mission accomplished. Letters delivered, replies secured. 3 ranchers willing to meet, discuss coalition, consider unified resistance. It was progress. Small, but real. That night, Caleb gave Thomas something. The Colt revolver he'd carried through the war. Model 1860 Army, 44 caliber, worn but functional. The same gun that had saved his life at Spotsylvania. This is yours now, Caleb said. Thomas held the weapon carefully. It was heavy, serious, adult. Why? Because you've earned it. Because you're the man of this family alongside me. Because if something happens to me, I need to know you can protect your mother and sister. Nothing's going to happen to you. Maybe not, but soldiers prepare for worst outcomes while hoping for best ones. That's why we survive when others don't. Thomas nodded, didn't cry, though Caleb could see the emotion working through him. The boy was growing up too fast, pushed by circumstances into manhood before childhood was finished. But that's what frontier life did. It compressed timelines, accelerated development, turned children into adults through necessity. The coalition meeting happened on December 15th. 5 ranchers gathered at Pete Lawson's barn under cover of checking cattle. Caleb presented the strategy: unified resistance, political pressure, railroad partnership, legal challenges to monopolistic consolidation. Pete was skeptical. Blackwood has lawyers who've been doing this for 20 years. We've got a war veteran and a dead banker's widow. No offense, Caleb, but this feels like trying to stop an avalanche with wishful thinking. Avalanches can be redirected. You don't stop them, you channel them. And how do we channel Vincent Blackwood? We make his path of destruction more expensive than negotiation. Every legal challenge costs money and time. Every political complication risks territorial intervention. Every delay increases railroad pressure. We don't have to beat him. We just have to make beating us more costly than compromise. The ranchers talked, argued, worried, but ultimately agreed. Coalition formed. 7 men representing 1,800 acres. Not much against Blackwood's empire, but enough to create leverage. They shook hands, made promises, understood that they'd just committed to a fight that might cost everything. As they were leaving, one of Blackwood's men was watching from a distant hill. Just watching, making sure they knew they'd been seen. The message was clear. Blackwood knew about the coalition, knew about the resistance, knew and didn't care because he'd fought bigger battles and won them all. December moved toward Christmas. The house transformed. Elena found decorations in storage, things Caleb had bought 11 years ago for a life that never happened. Garland, candles, small wooden ornaments carved during lonely winters when occupation was necessary to prevent madness. Grace took over decoration with the intensity she brought to chicken management. Every ornament had a story. Every candle had a specific location. The house that had been empty for 11 years suddenly looked like families actually lived there. Looked like home. Thomas asked Caleb about Christmas traditions. What did you do before? Before what? Before us, before you were alone. Nothing. I worked Christmas like any other day. Seemed easier than acknowledging what was missing. That's sad. It was practical. Practical and sad aren't opposites. They can both be true. Smart boy. Too smart sometimes. What did your family do before your father died? Church in the morning, dinner in the afternoon. Papa would read Christmas story from Bible. Mama would make cookies that were always slightly burned, but we pretended they were perfect. It wasn't elaborate, but it was ours. You miss it. I miss him. The tradition was just excuse to be together. Now we're together without him, and it feels wrong, like we're forgetting him by continuing without him. Caleb understood that. After Margaret left, he'd destroyed every tradition they'd planned together. Easier to eliminate reminders than endure their absence. Your father wouldn't want you to stop living because he might, Caleb said. He'd want you to build new traditions. Honor his memory by continuing forward, not by stopping. How do you know? Because that's what James would have wanted for me. And I spent 23 years ignoring that wisdom because grief made it easier to stop than continue. Are you continuing now? I'm trying. You're helping. Christmas Eve arrived cold and clear. Temperature 20 below, stars so bright they looked artificial. Caleb had a tradition nobody knew about. Every Christmas Eve since Chancellorsville, he rode to a hilltop 5 miles north where he'd buried a piece of James Corrigan's uniform. Not a real grave. James was buried in Virginia, but a symbol, a place to remember. This year he took Thomas. They rode in silence, watching their breath cloud in freezing air. The hilltop was marked by a single stone Caleb had placed 23 years ago. No inscription, nothing that would invite questions, just rock on a hill where one man came to talk to dead friends. Caleb dismounted, stood before the stone. Thomas stayed on his horse, understanding this was private ceremony. James, Caleb said quietly, it's been another year. A lot's happened. You'd be surprised. I have people now, a woman, 2 children, not mine by blood, but mine by choice. I think you'd approve. I think you'd say I finally figured out what you meant. He paused. Wind picked up, carrying snow that had fallen yesterday and hadn't settled yet. I'm scared, Caleb admitted. Man named Blackwood wants to take him everything. I'm going to have to fight him, and I don't know if I'm strong enough. Not like I was in the war. I'm older, slower, more to lose. Thomas spoke from his horse. You're talking to him. Yes. Does it help? Sometimes. Saying things aloud makes them real. Real things can be faced. Thomas dismounted, stood beside Caleb. Can I talk to my papa, even though he's not here? Yes, the boy faced the stone. Papa, it's Thomas. I'm in Montana now, learning to be a rancher, learning to fight and ride and protect Mama and Gracie. I miss you. I wish you were here. I wish you could see what I'm becoming. His voice cracked. I'm scared too. Scared I'm forgetting you. Scared I'm replacing you with Caleb. But Mama says you'd want me to keep living, keep growing. Says you'd be proud. I hope that's true. I hope wherever you are, you know I'm trying to be the man you wanted me to be. Thomas started crying. Quiet tears, barely visible in starlight. Caleb put a hand on the boy's shoulder. Didn't speak. Just stood there while Thomas grieved for a father who died 2 years ago, but was being buried again in this moment of moving forward. After a while, Thomas wiped his eyes. Sorry. Don't be. Grief doesn't follow schedules. Are you still grieving after 23 years? Yes, but it's different now, less sharp, more like permanent scar than fresh wound. You learn to carry it. I don't want to carry it forever. You won't. Eventually it becomes part of you instead of weight you're carrying. Takes time, though. They rode back slowly. The ranch house was visible from 3 miles away, lit by candles Elena had placed in every window. Looked like a lighthouse in an ocean of snow. Looked like home. Inside, Grace was waiting with impatience vibrating through her small frame. You're late. Dinner's ready. Empress Victoria laid an egg special for tonight, and if it gets cold, she'll be offended. Can't offend Empress Victoria, Caleb said seriously. No, she has opinions about punctuality. Dinner was ham from the smokehouse, potatoes from the cellar, bread fresh baked that morning. Grace's special egg was soft-boiled and divided 4 ways. Simple food but abundant. The kind of meal that represented security and survival and the incredible luxury of not being hungry. After dinner, Caleb gave gifts. He'd carved them over previous weeks, working late at night when others were sleeping. For Thomas, a knife with handle carved from elk antler. Practical, adult, a tool for a man. For Grace, a small wooden chicken that looked suspiciously like Empress Victoria, complete with carved scowl. She's perfect, Grace breathed. She has the same attitude. Elena gave Caleb socks she'd knitted from wool she'd bought in town with money saved from household budget. They were slightly uneven, one longer than the other, but they represented hours of work during stolen moments. They're perfect, Caleb said. They're crooked. They're made by hand for me specifically. That makes them perfect. Then Caleb brought out the last gift, the one he had been working on since November. A locket, not new. It had been his mother's, one of the few things he'd kept after she died when he was 16. Gold, delicate, containing a small photograph of his parents on their wedding day. He gave it to Elena. She opened it, saw the photograph. Caleb, I can't. This is your family. You are my family now. They'd want you to have it. But your mother died alone and bitter because my father died in the Mexican War and she never recovered. I don't want that for us. I don't want fear to make us waste what we have. Elena's eyes filled with tears. What are we doing? Really? I don't know, but I know I want to keep doing it. Even with Blackwood? Even with everything coming? Especially with everything coming. James died so I could survive. Maybe I survived so I could protect you. Maybe this is the point, the reason. Or maybe we're all just making meaning out of random chance. Maybe, but I choose to believe otherwise. Elena closed the locket, put it around her neck. Thank you. They sat by the fire after the children went to bed, close but not touching. The line between employer and employee, between allies and something more, was blurring daily, but neither was willing to cross it completely. Too much uncertainty, too much at stake. I'm falling in love with you, Elena said quietly. I thought you should know. Caleb didn't move. I know. Does it change things? Yes. How? Makes me more dangerous to Blackwood. Man with nothing to lose will accept death. Man with everything to lose will do anything to survive. That's not romantic. No, but it's true. Elena leaned against him, just slightly, just enough that warmth transferred through clothing. I'm terrified of losing this. So am I. Then what do? We fight, we survive, we protect what we're building. And if we can't, then at least we tried. At least we chose love over fear. That's more than most people manage. They sat until the fire died, until cold crept back into the house, until responsibility demanded sleep because morning would come early and work wouldn't wait. But in that moment, beside a dying fire on Christmas Eve, 1888, Caleb Ashford believed for the first time in 23 years that maybe James Corrigan's sacrifice hadn't been meaningless. Maybe this was the point, this moment, this family, this choice to fight for something instead of just surviving. December 27th brought the coalition's second meeting, larger this time. 9 ranchers, 1 railroad representative who'd come quietly without official company knowledge, 1 territorial deputy marshal who owed Caleb a favor from the war. The strategy was solidifying. Railroad would support water rights legislation protecting against monopolistic control. Deputy Marshal would investigate Blackwood's acquisition methods for legal irregularities. Ranchers would petition territorial government for emergency protections. It was working. Slowly, carefully, but working. Momentum building. Blackwood's path of least resistance was developing obstacles. That's when the fire started, December 29th, 3 in the morning. Caleb woke to smoke. His war instincts took over before conscious thought. He was moving, pulling on boots, grabbing rifle, shouting for Thomas before his mind had fully processed danger. The hay storage barn was burning, flames 30 feet high, roaring with chemical intensity. Not accidental. Accelerant used. Kerosene, maybe coal oil. Deliberated, planned war. Thomas appeared, dressed, armed, ready. I'll get the horses from the stable. No, too dangerous. They'll die if we don't. Better them than you. That's not who we are. The boy was right. Caleb knew it even as every instinct screamed to keep Thomas safe. They were ranchers. Animals were responsibility. You didn't abandon them because rescue was risky. Together then, Caleb said. Stay behind me. If anything falls, run. They went in. Smoke was thick, hot, choking. Visibility 3 feet maximum. Caleb moved by memory, counting steps, using geometry to navigate blindness. The horses were screaming, panic-mad with fear. Getting them out required breaking their terror, imposing human will on animal instinct. Caleb got the first two out, sent them running toward open field, went back for the others. The barn was collapsing, timbers cracking with sounds like artillery. Heat was physical force, pressure wave pushing against skin. That's when the main beam fell. 40 feet of burning timber, coming down like the hammer of God. Caleb saw it, shoved Thomas aside, took the hit himself. Pain was immediate and absolute. The beam landed across his shoulders, pinning him, burning through shirt and into skin. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Weight was impossible, crushing, lethal. Thomas screamed. Then he was there, 11 years old and lifting timber that weighed 300 pounds. Impossible. Physics didn't allow it. But panic and love made humans capable of impossible things. The boy lifted just enough that Caleb could roll, escape, survive. They crawled out together, emerged from smoke and flame into freezing air that felt like salvation. Elena was there. Pete Lawson was there somehow, having seen flames from 3 miles away and ridden hard. Others coming, neighbors, coalition members, people who'd decided that when one member was attacked, all were attacked. The barn burned for 6 hours, 50% of winter hay gone, $1,200 in feed, months of preparation destroyed. It could have been worse. Could have been the main barn with all the horses. Could have been the house, but it was bad enough. At dawn, Sheriff Morrison arrived, examined the burn site, found kerosene residue, found boot prints in snow that matched known Blackwood employees, found enough evidence to justify investigation, but not enough for immediate arrest. This is attempted murder, Elena said. Her voice was shaking with rage. They tried to kill my family. I'll investigate, Morrison said, but investigations take time. Evidence, legal process. How much time? Weeks, maybe months. We don't have weeks. Morrison looked at the burned barn, at Caleb's burns, bandaged but seeping, at Thomas's hands, torn and bloodied from lifting burning timber. I know, but law moves slowly. That's the problem. After Morrison left, the coalition members brought supplies: hay, feed, lumber. Everything that had burned would be replaced communally. Attack on one was attack on all. This was frontier justice. This was how communities survived when official protection was inadequate. Pete Lawson stayed until noon, helping clear debris. Before leaving, he pulled Caleb aside. I'm not selling to Blackwood anymore. Pete, you have to. Bank forecloses otherwise. I'll find another way. Borrow from family, sell something else, but I won't give that man what he wants after this. He crossed a line. This puts your family at risk. They're already at risk. We all are. Only question is whether we face it alone or together. Caleb shook his hand. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Thank me if we survive this. That evening, Elena cleaned Caleb's burns, 2nd degree across both shoulders. Painful but not permanently damaging. He'd been lucky. Timber had been partially burned through when it fell. Full weight would have broken his back. You saved Thomas, Elena said. He saved me. Lifting that timber should have been impossible. Love makes impossible things possible. Or desperation. What's the difference? Caleb didn't have an answer for that. Later, after Elena had gone to bed, Thomas found Caleb on the porch. The boy sat beside him in silence for long minutes. Then he said, I wasn't strong enough. I needed to be stronger. You were strong enough. We both survived. Barely, if the timber had fallen differently, but it didn't. Battlefield retrospection is useless. We can only control what happens next, not what might have happened. What does happen next? Blackwood escalates. We escalate. Eventually someone wins. What if it's him? Then we lose everything, but we'll have tried. That matters. Does it? Papa tried. He still died. Your father tried to survive consumption with 1880s medicine. He faced impossible odds. We're facing difficult odds. Different. How do you know the difference? Experience, instinct, and faith that sometimes the universe lets good people win. You believe that? After everything? I choose to believe it. Choosing hope over despair is its own kind of courage. Thomas nodded. They sat watching stars emerge as clouds cleared. Somewhere to the south, Vincent Blackwood was planning next moves. Somewhere in the valley, coalition members were preparing for war. And here, on this porch, two people who'd become family through choice rather than blood were deciding that some things were worth fighting for even when victory wasn't guaranteed. January arrived with news that changed everything. Vincent Blackwood had filed a legal claim. Said Caleb's original survey was fraudulent. Claimed the surveyor, a man named Arthur Morton, who died in 1881, had admitted to falsifying boundary markers before his death. Claimed Caleb's property extended only 400 acres, not 600. The disputed 200 acres included the creek, the water rights, everything that mattered. Court date set for February 14th, Valentine's Day. Blackwood had a sense of irony. If Caleb lost, he lost 2/3 of his ranch's value, lost the water rights, lost strategic position, lost everything that made Silver Ridge Ranch defensible. He needed proof of survey legitimacy, needed original notes, original surveys, original documentation. But Arthur Morton had been dead 7 years, and his papers had been destroyed in a fire 3 years after his death, almost as if someone had planned it that way. We need a miracle, Elena said. Miracles are just preparation meeting opportunity, Caleb replied. But he didn't sound convinced. That's when they got the letter from Judge Augustus Hayes, not a relative of Elena, despite shared surname, just coincidence in a world that specialized in cruel coincidences. Hayes was territorial judge presiding over the survey dispute, and he was also blind. The letter said Hayes had original survey notes, said Arthur Morton had been his friend, said Morton kept meticulous records in Braille because Hayes would review them by touch, said those notes still existed in Hayes's private collection, said he'd testify in court if they could bring him the documents he'd stored in Helena. Helena was 120 miles away, through winter mountain passes, 3 days travel minimum, 6 days round trip, and court was in 4 weeks. I'll go, Thomas said. Absolutely not. You can't. Your burns aren't healed. Pete has one arm. The other coalition members are too old or too slow. I'm the only one fast enough. You're 11 years old, period. I'm the man who lifted burning timber off you. I'm old enough. Caleb looked at Elena. She was pale but nodding. He's right. We have no choice. There's always choice. I can go myself. And arrive too injured to be useful? And leave us unprotected if Blackwood attacks while you're gone? Thomas is right and you know it. Caleb did know it, hated it but knew it. War required sacrifice, required putting people at risk because mission demanded it. He'd sent 18-year-old soldiers on suicide missions during the war because strategic necessity outweighed individual safety. But this was different. This was Thomas. This was the boy who'd become his son in everything but law. If you go, Caleb said slowly, you go fully prepared. Best horse, best weapons, money, maps, instructions for every contingency. I understand. And you don't take unnecessary risks. If there's danger, you run. If there's trouble, you hide. Mission is important, but your life is more important. Yes, sir. Don't call me sir. I'm your father now, or as close as matters. Thomas's eyes widened. You mean that? Yes. I should have said it weeks ago. I'm slow with words, but yes. You're my son in every way that matters. Thomas hugged him. First time, sudden and fierce and desperate. I'll come back, I promise. You better. Your mother will kill me if you don't. They spent 2 days preparing. Shadow was their best horse, fastest and most enduring. Winchester rifle, Colt revolver, $50 in cash, enough to bribe or buy help if needed. Maps marked with friendly ranches, places Thomas could stop if trouble emerged. Emergency plans, contingencies, everything Caleb could think of to keep a boy alive on dangerous journey through hostile territory. The night before departure, Elena gave Thomas something. His father's pocket watch, the one possession from Boston she'd managed to keep. "Papa gave this to me before he died," she said. "Said time is the only thing we can't buy more of. Said use it wisely. You're using time wisely. He'd be proud. I'll bring it back." "Bring yourself back. The watch doesn't matter. You matter." Thomas left at dawn. Caleb watched him ride north, watched Shadow's dark shape grow smaller against white snow until distance swallowed them both. Elena stood beside him, holding Grace, all three watching the same point where the boy had disappeared. "What have we done?" Elena whispered. "What we had to. What if he doesn't come back? Then we'll have lost everything that matters. I can't lose another child." "You won't. Thomas is smart and capable and carrying every skill I could teach him. He'll survive." "You don't know that." "No, but I believe it. That's all we have." The waiting was worse than combat. In battle, you had action, adrenaline, purpose. Waiting meant nothing but imagination and fear. Every hour wondering where Thomas was, whether he was safe, whether they'd sent a boy to die because adults couldn't solve problems themselves. 48 hours. That's how long it took for the silence to become unbearable. Caleb couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, just paced and worried and performed rituals that did nothing but occupy time. On the third day, a telegraph arrived from Helena. 11 words that changed everything. "Arrived safely, found judge, returning with documents, Thomas Hayes." Elena cried when she read it, relief so profound it manifested as physical collapse. Grace asked why Mama was sad, and Elena explained these were happy tears, which confused the 6-year-old because tears were supposed to mean sadness. Grown-ups are complicated, Grace decided. Empress Victoria is much simpler. But the relief was temporary. Thomas still had to return, had to cover 120 miles through territory Blackwood could easily control. The boy had made it to Helena. Getting back was the harder journey. January 7th, still no Thomas. Storm had moved in, making travel dangerous. Telegraph lines down, no word, no information, just silence and waiting and the slow grinding terror of not knowing. January 8th, nothing. January 9th, a rider appeared at dawn. Not Thomas, one of Blackwood's men. He delivered a message and left without speaking. The message was simple. "Your boy is traveling dangerous roads. Accidents happen in winter. Perhaps we should talk about terms before tragedy forces different conversations." It was threat wrapped in courtesy. Confirmation that Blackwood knew Thomas was traveling. Confirmation he could reach the boy if he wanted. Confirmation that every hour Thomas was exposed was an hour he could be attacked. Caleb nearly rode out immediately, nearly abandoned the ranch to search for Thomas himself. Elena stopped him. "He said he'd come back," she said. "Trust him." Blackwood threatened him. Blackwood threatens everyone. Thomas knows the risks. He's not a child anymore. We made him a man by necessity. Now we have to trust that man. She was right, but right didn't make waiting easier. January 10th, 2 in the afternoon. Grace was explaining to Empress Victoria why laying eggs in the nesting box was preferable to laying them behind the water trough. Caleb was checking weapons for the 15th time. Elena was cooking without awareness, just occupying hands so mine couldn't spiral into fear. That's when Shadow appeared over the ridge. Thomas was on her back, slumped forward, barely conscious, but alive. They got him inside. Hypothermia, exhaustion. He'd ridden straight through, stopping only when absolutely necessary, pushing himself and the horse to limits that should have killed them both. But he'd made it. And in his saddlebags, wrapped in waterproof oilcloth, were Judge Hayes's original survey notes. The proof they needed, the documentation that would prove Caleb's land claim legitimate. Thomas woke after 6 hours. First thing he said was, "Did I make it in time?" "Yes," Caleb said. 4 days until court. You made it with margin. Good. I promised I'd come back. You kept your promise. Papa taught me that men keep promises. You taught me that keeping them sometimes requires doing impossible things. You nearly died. But I didn't. Mission accomplished. Isn't that what matters? Caleb couldn't answer. His throat was too tight. This boy, his son, had risked everything to save their home, had ridden through winter and danger and potential death because that's what family did. Protected each other, even at cost of everything. I'm proud of you, Caleb finally managed. I learned from the best. That evening, after Thomas was sleeping and Grace was explaining to Empress Victoria about heroism, Caleb found Elena in the kitchen. He almost died, Caleb said, but he didn't. Because of luck, random chance, an inch different, and we'd be burying him. That's life, that's risk. We can't protect them from everything. I want to. I know, so do I, but loving people means accepting we can't guarantee their safety. We can only teach them to protect themselves and hope it's enough. What if it's not? Then we grieve and survive, like we've always done, but we don't stop living because death is possible. We live harder because death is guaranteed eventually. Caleb pulled her close. First time they'd embraced without hesitation or second guessing. Just held each other because holding was all that made sense. I love you, he said. I know. No, I mean, I love you. Not convenience, not practicality, not business arrangement. I love you and your children and this family we've built. I love you too. Have for weeks, was waiting for you to catch up. I'm slow with emotions. Yes, but you get there eventually. They stood like that until Grace's voice penetrated from outside. Empress Victoria says humans are very slow at figuring out obvious things. She knew weeks ago. Caleb laughed, first real laugh since before the war. That chicken is too smart. That chicken, Elena said, is the smartest member of this household. The hearing was in 4 days. Thomas's documents would prove Caleb's claim. But everyone knew proof wasn't enough. Blackwood would have lawyers, judges in pockets, influence that could override evidence. The real battle wasn't in the courthouse. It was in what happened after. And Caleb Ashford, looking at this family he'd built through choice and necessity and stubborn refusal to let loneliness win, knew one absolute truth. He would do anything to protect them. Anything at all. Even if that meant becoming the kind of man James Corrigan had saved him from becoming. Even if that meant crossing lines he'd sworn never to cross. Because love wasn't just building homes and sharing meals and holding hands by firelight. Love was also being willing to destroy anyone who threatened what you'd built. And Vincent Blackwood had just made the fatal mistake of threatening everything Caleb Ashford loved. The war was about to get worse, much worse, and only one side would survive. February 10th, 1889, 4 days before the hearing that would determine everything. Caleb Ashford stood in his bedroom, adjusting a tie he hadn't worn in 11 years. The suit was good quality, purchased in San Francisco back when he thought wealth and respectability would win Margaret Sinclair. It still fit, though his shoulders were broader from ranch work and his hands rougher than any gentleman's should be. Today he was getting married. The decision had come suddenly, though the feeling had been building for months. 3 nights ago, Elena had found him on the porch at midnight, unable to sleep, running battlefield scenarios for the hearing. She'd sat beside him without speaking for 20 minutes before finally saying, "Ask me." "Ask you what?" "What you've been trying to work up courage to ask for 6 weeks. I don't know what you mean." "Caleb Ashford, I'm a widow who crossed 1,000 miles with 23 cents and 2 starving children. I don't have patience for cowardice. If you want to marry me, ask. If you don't, stop looking at me like you're trying to solve an impossible mathematics problem." He'd laughed, couldn't help it. This woman had a way of cutting through his carefully constructed defenses with surgical precision. "I'm terrified," he'd admitted. "Of what?" "Of asking and you saying no. Of asking and you saying yes. Of building something permanent and having it destroyed like everything else I've tried to build. So you'd rather have nothing permanent because temporary can't hurt as much? When you say it like that, it sounds stupid. That's because it is stupid." She'd taken his hand. "I'm terrified too. My last marriage ended with me watching my husband drown in his own lungs while doctors did nothing because we couldn't afford nothing. I'm terrified of loving someone again and losing them, but I'm more terrified of dying without having tried. Elena Hayes, Caleb had said, his voice rough with emotion he had spent 23 years suppressing. Will you marry me? Yes, 1,000 times yes, but only if you promise to stop being an idiot about feelings. I can't promise that. Best I can offer is trying to be less of an idiot. I'll take it. They'd told the children the next morning. Grace had responded by informing Empress Victoria that there would be a wedding and the chicken's attendance was mandatory. Thomas had gone very quiet, then asked if this meant Caleb would legally be his father. If you want that, Caleb had said carefully, more than anything. Then yes, legally, officially, in every way possible. Thomas had nodded, turned away, and walked outside. Elena had started to follow, but Caleb stopped her. Let him process. Sometimes men need space to handle big emotions. He'd found Thomas an hour later in the barn, crying in Shadow's stall where no one could see. The boy had looked up, ashamed to be caught in vulnerability. It's not weakness, Caleb had said. Crying because you're happy is human. I cried after Chancellorsville when I realized I'd survived. You did? For 3 hours, alone, where no one could see, because I'd been taught that men don't cry, and it took me years to understand that teaching was wrong. I miss Papa, but I'm happy about this. Both things are true, and it feels wrong. One things can be true. Your father would want you to be happy, would want you to have a family. You're not betraying him by accepting me. How do you know? Because if I'd died at Chancellorsville, I'd want James to live fully, would want him to find joy in family and everything that makes life worth living. That's what love is, wanting people to thrive even when you're not there to see it. Now, 4 days later, Caleb stood in his wedding suit while Elena prepared in the other room. The ceremony would be small, 40 townspeople. Pete Lawson officiating because he was ordained from his previous life as a Methodist circuit preacher. Simple vows, simple promises. Nothing elaborate because elaborate felt false when the world was potentially ending in 4 days. Grace knocked on his door. She was wearing a dress Elena had made from fabric they'd bought in town, dark blue with white lace collar. She looked impossibly grown up for 6 years old. Mama says you look handsome, but sad, Grace reported. She wants to know why you're sad. I'm not sad, just nervous. Empress Victoria says nervousness and sadness look the same from outside. You have to specify. Tell Empress Victoria I'm nervous but happy. She'll want confirmation. She's skeptical of human emotional reporting. Caleb laughed. That chicken is going to run this ranch someday. Obviously, she's the smartest of all of us. The ceremony happened in the house because February in Montana was 20 degrees below zero, and outdoor weddings were suicide. Pete Lawson stood before the fireplace, wearing his best suit and the expression of someone taking responsibility very seriously. The townspeople crowded in, filling every available space. Martha Thornton cried. Sheriff Morrison looked uncomfortable in formal clothes. The railroad representative who'd been helping with coalition strategy stood in the back, watching everything with the calculation of someone always thinking 3 moves ahead. Elena appeared from the bedroom and Caleb forgot to breathe. She wore a dress from her previous life, something she'd kept despite poverty because it was her wedding dress from her first marriage. She'd altered it, changed it, made it new while honoring old. Her hair was up, exposing the delicate line of her neck. She wore the locket he'd given her at Christmas. She was the most beautiful thing Caleb had ever seen. Thomas walked her forward, gave her hand to Caleb, said quietly, "Take care of her, I'll come after you with that cavalry saber." "Deal," Caleb whispered back. Pete began the ceremony, standard words. Love, honor, commitment. The usual promises people made when they believed forever was possible. Caleb had heard these words before, at his parents' wedding when he was 8, at James Corrigan's wedding 3 weeks before Chancellorsville, at a dozen other ceremonies where people swore eternal devotion and meant it with their whole hearts. But this was different. This was his choice, his commitment, his forever, however long forever lasted. "Caleb," Pete said, "your vows." Caleb had prepared something, had written words and memorized them because he was terrible at spontaneous emotion. But standing here, looking at Elena, looking at Thomas and Grace, looking at 40 people who'd chosen to witness this moment despite danger and winter, and the very real possibility that everything could be destroyed in 4 days, the prepared words felt inadequate. So he spoke from somewhere deeper than preparation. Elena, I survived the war so I could stand here today. I survived 23 years of loneliness and grief so I could meet you. I survived everything the universe threw at me because this moment was waiting. I promise to protect you with everything I have. I promise to be the man your children need. I promise to love you even when love is hard. I promise to fight for this family with my last breath. And I promise that whatever comes in 4 days, or 4 years, or 40 years, you will never doubt that choosing me was right. Elena's eyes were wet. She composed herself, then spoke her own vows. Caleb, you found me when I was dying. You gave my children hope when they had none. You showed Thomas what strength looks like. You showed Grace that safety is possible. You showed me that love doesn't end when death comes. I promise to stand beside you in every battle. I promise to build a home worth fighting for. I promise to remind you every day that James Corrigan's sacrifice was worth something because you're standing here alive, choosing love. And I promise that no matter what Vincent Blackwood or anyone else tries to take from us, they can't take this. This moment, this choice, this family we've built from nothing and 23 cents. Pete pronounced them married. Caleb kissed Elena for the third time in their relationship. The first had been Christmas Eve, tentative and questioning. The second had been 3 nights ago, when she'd accepted his proposal, desperate and relieved. This third kiss was different. This was promise. This was commitment. This was forever as much as humans could promise forever. The townspeople applauded. Grace announced that Empress Victoria approved of the union. Thomas looked happy and determined all at once, his face cycling through emotions too complex for 11 years old, but somehow managing all of them. The celebration was brief. Food, conversation, the standard wedding elements compressed because everyone knew what was coming. In 4 days, Caleb would go to court and fight for everything they just celebrated. And after the court, regardless of outcome, Vincent Blackwood would make his next move. As the townspeople were leaving, Sheriff Morrison pulled Caleb aside. Judge Hayes was attacked 2 nights ago, he said quietly. Caleb's blood went cold. How badly? Beaten unconscious. Documents stolen. Still hasn't woken up. The survey notes? Gone. Everything stopped. The documents Thomas had risked his life to retrieve. The proof they needed to win in court. Gone. Stolen by men who'd beaten an old blind man to get them. Can we postpone the hearing? Caleb asked. Judge Walter says no. Blackwood's lawyers are arguing that delay is admission you have no case. Judge Hayes was supposed to testify. Now he can't. Documents are gone. You've got nothing. We have Thomas's testimony. He saw the notes. Can describe them. Hearsay. 11-year-old boy's word against Blackwood's lawyers. You know how that ends? Caleb did know. Without physical evidence, without Judge Hayes' testimony, the case collapsed. Blackwood would win by default, would take 200 acres, including the creek, would destroy Silver Ridge Ranch strategically and economically, would have won through violence and theft. After Morrison left, Caleb told Elena, watch the hope drain from her face, watch determination replace it. Then we prepare for what comes after, she said. Which is war, real war, not legal battles or coalition strategies. Blackwood made his choice. Now we make ours. That night, the coalition met one final time. Pete Lawson, Henderson, Wilson, the others. Men who'd chosen resistance over capitulation. They gathered in Caleb's barn, breath fogging in freezing air, discussing options that ranged from desperate to suicidal. We could ambush Blackwood before the hearing, Henderson suggested. Make it clear that legal victory won't mean safety. That's murder, Pete said. It's war, different rules. No, we're not killers. The moment we cross that line, we become what we're fighting against. They argued for 2 hours, reached no conclusion except grim acknowledgement that they'd probably lost. That Blackwood had been smarter, more ruthless, more willing to do whatever necessary. that fighting with honor against someone with none was strategic disadvantage. As they were leaving, a rider arrived. Alone, unarmed, carrying white flag, Vincent Blackwood. He dismounted slowly, careful to show he was no threat. 56 years old, wearing wealth like armor, carrying himself with confidence of someone who'd never really lost. Major Ashford, and he said, "Congratulations on your marriage. I heard it was lovely. Get off my land. In a moment. First, I have a proposal. May we speak privately?" Caleb nodded to the barn. They went inside, leaving the coalition members outside. Whatever Blackwood wanted to say, Caleb would hear it. Know your enemy. Basic military strategy. "I'm withdrawing my legal claim," Blackwood said without preamble. Caleb stared. "What?" "The survey dispute. I'm dropping it. You keep all 600 acres. Full water rights. I'll pay $10,000 in restitution for damages caused by the fire." "Why?" "Because I had a visitor yesterday. My son. Haven't seen him in 15 years. He came to Helena on business, heard about my activities, decided to investigate." Blackwood looked old suddenly. Tired. He asked me who I'd become. Asked if wealth and power were worth losing him. Asked if I even remembered why I was fighting so hard to acquire more when I already have more than I can spend in 10 lifetimes. "And what did you tell him?" "Nothing." I had no answer. Because the truth is, I've been fighting for so long, I forgot what I was fighting for. Started as survival after the war. Became habit. Became obsession. Became the only thing I knew how to do. Blackwood sat on a hay bale, sudden human instead of Titan. "Your boy rode to Helena in a winter storm to save your land. Risked his life for family. My boy had to track me down because I haven't visited him in 15 years. You have sons. I have money. I'm 66 years old, and no one will mourn me when I die." "This could be strategy," Caleb said carefully. "Trick to make me lower defenses." "Could be, but it's not. I'm tired, Major. I'm tired of fighting and buying and consolidating and waking up every morning with more property and less reason to get out of bed. My son said he'd give me a chance. One chance to be the father he remembers instead of the monster I've become. But only if I make amends. Start with you." "Why me specifically?" "Because you're the one I hurt worst. Because your boy's courage reminded me what I've lost. Because if I can't do right by you, I can't do right by anyone." Caleb studied Blackwood for a long moment, looking for deception, for angles, for the trap that had to be there. But all he saw was exhausted old man who'd climbed mountain of success and found view empty. "I don't forgive you," Caleb said finally. "I don't expect you to. But I understand you. I spent 11 years alone because I was too hurt to risk loving anyone. You spent 15 years fighting because you were too hurt to stop. Different symptoms. Same wound. The war. The war, everything after. The whole damn world that takes everything good and grinds it down." Blackwood nodded. "What do we do now?" "You withdraw your claim, pay restitution, leave this valley, go to your son, try to rebuild what you destroyed. And if I ever hear you're hurting people again, I'll come find you." Fair, more than fair. They shook hands, two old soldiers recognizing each other across battlefield of choices made and lives lived. Not friends, never friends, but no longer enemies. Just men trying to survive trauma in different ways. After Blackwood left, Caleb told the coalition, told Elena, told Thomas, who'd been listening from the hayloft because the boy had James Corrigan's gift for strategic eavesdropping. "Is it over?" Thomas asked. "This part is. There'll be other battles, but this one, yes, we won. Because I rode to Helena. Because you showed courage that reminded a bitter old man what courage looks like. Because your willingness to risk everything for family made him see what he'd lost. Because sometimes the best weapon isn't violence. It's being better than your enemy, making them see what they could be instead of what they are." The hearing on February 14th was anticlimactic. Blackwood's lawyers withdrew the challenge. Judge Walter declared Caleb's title unchallenged. Court adjourned in 15 minutes. What should have been desperate battle became administrative procedure. Outside the courthouse, reporters wanted statements. Townspeople wanted details. Blackwood himself was there. signing documents, making withdrawal official. He approached Caleb one final time. I'm leaving for Oregon tomorrow. My son has a ranch there and needs help. I'm going to try being a father instead of a baron. Good luck. You too, raise that boy right. He's got something special. I know. Better than I ever managed with mine. But maybe not too late to learn. Blackwood walked away, mounted his expensive horse, rode out of Silver Creek toward whatever life came next. The coalition members watched him go with expressions ranging from relief to disbelief. Did we just win? Pete asked. Yes, Caleb said. We won. How do we celebrate? By going home, by being with family, by remembering that winning isn't about defeating enemies. It's about protecting what matters. They dispersed, back to ranches and lives and the endless work of survival. The coalition remained, but the immediate crisis was over. They'd faced Montana's richest man and survived. That would be story told for decades. Caleb rode home with his family, his wife, his son, his daughter. Words that still felt strange but increasingly right. The ranch appeared over the ridge, smoke rising from chimney, chickens visible in their yard. Home, earned through suffering and choice and stubborn refusal to surrender. That evening, Thomas found Caleb in the barn. The boy was carrying the cavalry saber, holding it carefully. I want to learn to use this properly, Thomas said. Why? Because Blackwood withdrew, but there will be others. Because frontier life means fighting. Because I want to protect this family the way you protected us. Caleb took the saber, showed Thomas proper grip, proper stance, proper respect for weapon that had saved lives and taken them. They practiced for an hour, father teaching son the skills that might someday mean survival. Later, Elena found them. Dinner's ready. 5 more minutes, Thomas said. I almost have this guard position right. Soldiers don't skip meals, Caleb said. Eating is tactical necessity. We'll practice after dinner. They went inside together. Grace was setting table with the seriousness she brought to everything. She'd made place cards with everyone's names, including one for Empress Victoria, who apparently would be dining with them in spirit. The meal was simple: venison stew, bread, coffee. The kind of food that represented normalcy and safety and the incredible luxury of not being at war. They ate together, talking about nothing important. Grace's chicken reports, Thomas's progress with saber work, Elena's plans for spring garden, Caleb's need to repair the north fence before snowmelt, domestic details, the stuff of life, the things worth fighting for. After dinner, Caleb sat on the porch. Elena joined him, bringing blanket because February nights were brutal. They sat close, sharing warmth, watching stars emerge. What do we do now? Elena asked. Live, build, raise children, run ranch, all the boring things people do when they're not fighting for survival. That sounds nice. It does. I'd forgotten what nice felt like. Do you think Blackwood will really change? I don't know, maybe. People can change if they want to badly enough. I changed, you changed, we all changed. What changed you, really? Caleb thought about that. About the trajectory from battlefield to loneliness to family. About the choices that led here. About 23 years of grief finally transmuting into something resembling peace. You, he said finally. Thomas, Grace, you changed me by refusing to let me stay broken, by insisting that I was worth saving even when I'd given up on myself. We didn't do anything special. You existed. You needed me. You gave me reason to be more than just survivor. You made me want to live instead of just continuing. Elena kissed him, soft and slow and full of promise. I love you, Caleb Ashford. I love you too. Took me long enough to admit it. Yes, but you got there eventually. They sat until cold drove them inside. The house was warm, lit by fire and candles. Thomas was reading. Grace was drawing another chicken portrait, this one featuring Empress Victoria wearing a crown. Normal life. The kind Caleb had thought impossible. 3 weeks later, Elena told him she was pregnant. They were in the kitchen, morning light streaming through windows, coffee brewing, the smell of breakfast filling air. She'd been sick for days, trying to hide it, trying to keep working through nausea. Caleb had noticed but hadn't pushed. Elena would tell him when ready. I'm pregnant, she said suddenly. No preamble, just facts stated plainly. Caleb froze, coffee cup halfway to mouth, brain trying to process information that didn't quite compute. You're sure? Yes, 3 months probably. I didn't realize at first because of stress and everything with Blackwood. But yes, I'm sure. How do you feel about it? Terrified, excited, overwhelmed, all of it simultaneously. How do I feel about it? I don't know. Tell me. Caleb set down his coffee, tried to find words for emotion that was too large for vocabulary. I'm going to be a father. Actually, biologically be a father. I never thought. After Margaret left, I gave up on that possibility. Accepted I'd die alone. And now I'm married with 3 children and a fourth coming, and I don't know what to do with this much happiness. You're happy? Yes. Terrified but happy. Is that normal? I think so. When I was pregnant with Thomas, William was terrified. Kept worrying he'd be terrible father. Kept asking if I was sure we could handle parenthood. But he was wonderful. Terror doesn't mean failure. It means caring enough to be scared. What do we tell Thomas and Grace? The truth they deserve to know. And Thomas needs to understand he's still important, still loved, still family, even though there's baby coming. They told the children that evening. Grace's response was immediate and enthusiastic. A baby. I'll teach it about chickens. Empress Victoria will be excellent aunt. Thomas was quieter. Are you happy? He asked Caleb. Yes. Are you? I don't know. I'm happy, but also scared you'll love the baby more because it's yours biologically. Thomas, look at me. You are my son. Grace is my daughter. This baby will be my child. All 3 of you are mine. Biology doesn't change that. Do you understand? I think so. If I have to prove it every day for the rest of your life, I will. Your family, that's permanent. Thomas nodded. Didn't quite believe it yet, but wanted to. That was enough. Belief would come with time and consistent demonstration. Caleb would make sure of it. Spring came slowly to Montana territory. Snow melted inch by inch, revealing land beneath. Caleb and Thomas rode the property lines, checking for damage, planning repairs, doing the endless work of ranch management. The boy had grown. 13 now, his birthday having passed in March. Taller, stronger, voice deepening, becoming the man he'd been pushed toward by necessity. I've been thinking about my name, Thomas said one morning. What about it? I'm Thomas Hayes. You're Caleb Ashford. Grace is Grace Ashford now that you adopted her. I'm the only one with different last name. And you want to change it? I don't know. Papa's Thomas Hayes. I'm Thomas Hayes. Changing it feels like erasing him. You're not erasing him. You're honoring him by continuing to grow. Your father would want you to have family, would want you to belong somewhere. But would he want me to take your name? I think he'd want you to take whatever name makes you feel safe and loved. Names are just words. Family is what matters. Thomas was quiet for a mile of riding. Then he said, Thomas Hayes Ashford. What? Thomas Hayes Ashford. Keep Papa's name. Add yours. Be both. Honor both fathers. Caleb's throat tightened. That's perfect. You really think so? I know so. Your father gave you life. I'm trying to help you live it. Both matter. Both deserve recognition. They filed paperwork in April. Legal name change. Thomas Hayes became Thomas Hayes Ashford. The boy looked at the document with expression of someone who'd finally found missing piece, not replacing his father, expanding his identity to include both men who'd shaped him. Grace demanded similar treatment, wanted to be Grace Adelaide Ashford because Adelaide was one of her chickens, and chickens deserved representation in human names. They compromised on Grace Adelaide Hayes Ashford, which was absurdly long, but made the 7-year-old happy. The baby was born on June 20th. Boy, healthy, loud. They named him James Corrigan Ashford. Elena had wanted that name, had insisted despite Caleb's protest that it was too much, too presumptuous, too heavy for infant to carry, but she'd been adamant. James Corrigan saved you at Chancellorsville so you could save us in Montana, she'd said. His sacrifice made this family possible. He deserves to be remembered, to live on through someone who never knew him but exists because of him. So James Corrigan Ashford came into the world on summer morning, screaming his arrival, demanding attention and care and the constant vigilance all infants require. Caleb held his son, this small person who was his by blood and choice both, and felt something break open in his chest. He was 44 years old, had survived war and loss in 23 years of loneliness. And now he was holding his newborn son while his wife recovered and his adopted children played outside and chickens made noise in their coop. It was everything. It was enough. It was the thing James Corrigan had died to make possible. "Hello, James," Caleb whispered. "I'm your father. I'm going to mess up a lot because I don't know what I'm doing, but I promise I'll try. I'll protect you and teach you and show you that the world, despite everything, is worth living in. Because your namesake taught me that. Because choosing to live fully is the greatest honor we can give to those who died." The baby didn't understand, wouldn't for years. But Caleb said it anyway. Because some promises needed to be spoken aloud, witnessed by the universe, made real through articulation. Summer passed into fall. The ranch prospered. Thomas learned surveying, understanding land and value, and the complex mathematics of resource management. Grace became unofficial veterinarian, treating sick animals with competence that surprised everyone. Baby James grew, learned to smile, learned to sleep through night with only occasional midnight crying. Life became routine, the kind of routine Caleb had once thought boring, but now recognized as precious. Breakfast together, work during day, dinner together, evenings on porch watching sunset, the small rituals that made family real. In September, Caleb turned 45. Elena made cake. The children made cards. Grace's featured Empress Victoria congratulating him on not dying. Thomas's was more serious, thanking him for being father when fathers were needed most. Baby James contributed by spitting up on Caleb's shirt, which everyone agreed was fitting celebration. That evening, after children were in bed, Caleb and Elena sat on their porch. Same place they'd sat dozens of times. Same stars overhead. Same Montana sky that had watched them build this family from nothing and 23 cents. "Do you remember when we met?" Elena asked. "October 28th, 1888. You were dying. Thomas was trying to start fire with wet wood. Grace was hypothermic. You had 23 cents. And you saved us. We saved each other. I was dying too, just slower, more quietly. Do you think about what might have happened if you hadn't found us that night? Sometimes, you'd probably be dead. Thomas and Grace would be orphans or worse. I'd still be alone, eating silent dinners, counting years until meaningless death. But instead we're here, family, together, building something that matters." Elena took his hand. "I'm glad you found us." "So am I." They sat until cold drove them inside. The house was warm, full of sounds of sleeping children, full of life, full of everything that made existence worthwhile. Caleb locked the door, checked windows, performed the nightly security ritual that war had taught him, and fatherhood reinforced. Upstairs, Thomas was sleeping with cavalry saber on the wall above his bed. Grace was sleeping, surrounded by chicken drawings. Baby James was sleeping in crib Caleb had built. Same crib designed for children who'd never come, but finally being used for child who had. In their bedroom, Elena was already under covers. Caleb joined her, holding his wife, feeling the rhythm of her breathing, the warmth of her presence, the quiet miracle of not being alone. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" "For refusing to let me stay broken, for being brave enough to build this with me, for giving me family when I'd given up hope of having one. Thank you for finding us, for choosing us, for proving that sometimes desperate people in impossible situations can find each other and build something beautiful." They fell asleep holding each other. Two people who'd survived impossible things, finding peace in shared survival. 15 years later, on warm September afternoon in 1903, Caleb Ashford stood on his porch and watched his family. Thomas was 26 now, married, expecting his first child. He'd served in the Spanish-American War, earned Medal of Honor at San Juan Hill, returned to Montana decorated and determined to build ranching empire larger than his father's. Grace was 22, Montana's first licensed female veterinarian, running clinic in Silver Creek that served 6 counties. Baby James was 14, tall and serious, and showing signs of political ambition that would eventually take him to territorial senate. Elena was 54, hair going gray, body showing years of hard work and childbearing. In the thousand small compromises women made to survive frontier life, she was the most beautiful thing Caleb had ever seen. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, coming to stand beside him. "Everything, all of it. How we got here from there." "Any regrets?" "None. You?" "Not one." Thomas rode up on horse that was Shadow's great-grandchild. The original Shadow had died in 1895, old and honored, buried with ceremony that included Grace's insistence that Empress Victoria attend. Thomas dismounted, walked to porch, sat beside his father. "Papa," he said, the title he'd used for 15 years feeling as natural as breathing. "We need to talk about expanding the ranch. Market's changing. Railroad wants more consistent supply. If we coordinate purchases with Henderson and Wilson, we could control distribution for 3 territories." Caleb listened to his son outline strategy. Watch Thomas think like battlefield commander, like businessman, like man who'd learned young, that survival required thinking 3 moves ahead. Pride wasn't an adequate word for what Caleb felt. Something bigger. Something that encompassed gratitude and love, and the bone-deep satisfaction of knowing he had done his job. He'd raised this boy into a man who would build empires and raise children and continue the cycle. "What do you think?" Thomas asked. "I think you don't need my permission anymore. Haven't for years. You're asking out of courtesy. I'm asking because you're my father and I value your wisdom." "Then here's my wisdom. Do it. Build it. Create something that lasts. But remember that business is temporary. Family is permanent. Don't sacrifice the second for the first." "Like Blackwood did?" "Exactly like Blackwood did." Thomas nodded, stood, hugged his father with casual affection that had taken years to build. "Thank you for everything. I know I don't say it enough. Hey, you show it. That's better than saying it." After Thomas left, Grace arrived with baby James, who was explaining some political theory he'd read about representation and taxation. The boy was brilliant, destined for leadership, already showing signs of charisma that would serve him well in public life. They ate dinner together. 4 generations if you counted Thomas's pregnant wife. 5 generations connected through choice and chance, and the incredible luck of Caleb finding a dying woman and 2 starving children on October night 15 years ago. That night, lying in bed, Elena asked, "Do you think James Corrigan would be proud?" "Of what?" "Of what you built, of who you became, of this family that exists because he threw himself on artillery shell." Caleb thought about that, about the boy who'd saved him at Chancellorsville, about the promise to make it worth something, about 15 years of trying to honor that sacrifice through living fully instead of just surviving. "I think he'd say I finally figured it out." "Figured what out?" "That surviving isn't enough, that you have to build something worth surviving for. That love and family and choosing to be vulnerable despite every instinct screaming to stay protected is the bravest thing humans can do." "And are you glad you did, despite everything? Despite the fear and the risk and the very real possibility it could all have gone wrong?" "Yes, 1,000 times yes. This family, this life, this moment right now is worth every risk, worth everything." Elena kissed him. "I love you, Caleb Ashford. I love you too. Have since you scared me into proposing by threatening to make me die alone if I didn't find courage." That was good strategy. Best strategy. Worked perfectly. They fell asleep holding each other, same as they had for 15 years, same as they would for many more. Caleb died in 1925 at age 72. Elena lived to 89. Thomas Hayes Ashford had 4 children and 19 grandchildren. Grace's veterinary practice treated animals across Montana until her retirement in 1943. James Corrigan Ashford became territorial senator, pushed for statehood, saw Montana admitted to the Union in 1889, expanded the ranch to 2,000 acres before his death in 1956. The ranch remained in the family. 7 generations, still operating, still profitable, still built on foundation laid by man who'd survived war and loneliness and found family in desperate widow with 23 cents and 2 starving children. The cavalry saber still hangs in Montana Historical Society. Labeled Caleb Ashford's cavalry saber, Chancellorsville, 1863, symbol of survival and sacrifice. Visitors see it daily. Most don't know the full story, don't know about James Corrigan or Elena Hayes or the boy who rode through winter storms or the girl who talked to chickens or the baby named for a dead hero. But the family knows. It does. Passes stories down through generations. Ensures that children understand their heritage isn't just land and money. It's the choice to love despite risk, the choice to build despite uncertainty, the choice to believe that sometimes desperate people in impossible situations can find each other and create something that lasts. In the family cemetery on Silver Ridge Ranch, 7 generations are buried. Caleb and Elena lie side by side beneath the endless western sky they chose together. James Corrigan is buried in Virginia, 3,000 miles away, but a memorial stone stands beside Caleb's grave. Same stone Caleb visited every Christmas Eve for 40 years. The inscription reads, James Corrigan, 1844 to 1863. He saved me so I could save them. His sacrifice made everything possible. Underneath in smaller letters, some men survive, some men live. The difference is those who have courage to accept 23 cents and build everything. Caleb Ashford, 1924. That quote, spoken by 81-year-old Caleb to a newspaper reporter, became family motto, became wisdom passed down through generations, became a reminder that value isn't in what you have, but in what you do with what you're given. 23 cents, 2 dimes and 3 pennies. Enough to buy a loaf of bread and half a pound of coffee. Not enough to survive Montana winter. Not enough to build a family. Not enough for anything except a symbol of desperation and the incredible human capacity to build empires from nothing when love demands it. That's the story of Silver Ridge Ranch. That's the story of the Ashford family. That's the story of one man who survived war and found redemption in family. One woman who survived poverty and found safety in love. 2 children who survived loss and found home and acceptance. And 7 generations who understood that the greatest inheritance isn't money or land. It's the knowledge that love, chosen deliberately and protected fiercely, can transform 23 cents into everything that matters. The end.